driven by an overwhelming tide of public sentiment. Last year, the Maryland General Assembly shocked everybody by decriminalizing marijuana. It was said that it couldn't happen, that it was too controversial, that the issue was too complex. But there's a problem. The drug dealers are still in business. By far the broadest and most sweeping. I mean, this is the visionary bill that says the future is now. Marijuana prohibition is not working, and it has not worked for decades. So it's not working, so we said, let's start by acknowledging the obvious.
Traffic fatalities have actually gone down in Colorado. Crime has not increased. By all measures, the sky has not fallen in Colorado.
So the purpose of Senate Bill 531, the Marijuana Control and Revenue Act of 2015, is to finish the job.
What it would do, in short, is legalize possession of up to an ounce of marijuana for adults 21 and up, and create a tightly regulated system to grow, process, and sell that marijuana.
Regulate it as a lawful industry that employs Marylanders in real jobs for which they can pay real taxes.
So in addition to that, it would not allow public smoking. Driving under the influence of marijuana would remain illegal, and employers would still have the right to enforce their internal drug policies.
Any teenager in the state of Maryland who wanted to get access to marijuana could have done so long before decriminalization. In fact, we heard testimony in this committee for several years running saying it was a lot easier for teenagers to get marijuana than it was to get alcohol.
Dr. Gail Jordan-Randolph, she's the Deputy Secretary of Behavioral Health and Disabilities for the Maryland Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. And I'll preface it with this. For every study on one side, we can produce a study on the other side. She indicates in her study that 8% of middle school youth and 19.8% of high school youth in Maryland use marijuana. She goes on to point out the use of marijuana as it's associated with other drugs. 3.5 times more likely to drink alcohol, 6.5 times more likely to use prescription narcotic, and the numbers go on.
There's no gateway at all, none.
Well,
Between marijuana and more hardcore drugs at all.
well, scientifically it is proven that no, there is no gateway between using marijuana and using harder drugs. What it tells us is the criminal environment is the gateway.
A lot of people have this fear that if someone uses marijuana, they're going to go on to harder, stronger, more addictive drugs.
You know, this gateway theory thing, it is the environment. It's not the drugs, it's the environment.
If there is any sort of gateway effect, it has nothing to do with the chemical or physiological effects of marijuana, the substance itself. If there's anything that leads people to use other drugs, it's because of marijuana's presence in the criminal market.
Well, actually, Senator Burton, if you look at a lot of the research out there, you will see that cigarettes are a gateway to using other drugs. Alcohol is a gateway to using other drugs. It's not marijuana itself, because the studies show that marijuana has a very much lower addiction rate than alcohol or tobacco. And that when someone is going to buy marijuana, where are they going? They're going to a criminal element. And what does the drug dealer want? To sell more drugs. So hey, I'm sorry, I don't have any weed on me. How about some PCP? So that's the gateway where people are going to harder drugs because they're already in that element. So you take that element away and you put marijuana behind the counter and you regulate it, and you will not have that nexus.
To remind folks, I represent thousands of law enforcement officers across the country. Named the organization is Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. And obviously me in support of ending the prohibition of marijuana, I'm not an anomaly. There are thousands of police officers who have been educated regarding not just the failures of the prohibition of marijuana, but that this education has led us to believe that it's actually counterproductive to public safety, the very thing that we signed up for.
We were told to bring home numbers. The more charges preferred, the better. Drug treatment was never on the radar screen. I did not know, nor did I understand, the impact my arrest, my number would have on access to housing, jobs, child custody, and college. The tentacles for getting arrested with marijuana far exceeded my grasp of understanding as a young police officer or even as a seasoned commander.
Whether you agree with the usage of marijuana or not, about 19 million Americans use it. They either smoke it, they use it in edibles, there are oils, there are lotions, there are tinctures, even though I don't even know what that is. There's this incredible market out there right now. So Colorado, Washington, Alaska, Oregon, DC, these states didn't invent that market. So the question for you all right now is, who controls that market?
I mean, if you look at the revenue alone, the state of Colorado made more than $75 million from the marijuana industry last year, I believe, in tax revenue and fees. That's hundreds of millions of dollars that are going into a legal regulated market that's not going to drug dealers.
For me, it's about the violence. It's about, millions of dollars that continue to go into the pockets of organized crime. Senator Raskin spoke about, in Colorado, $1 million a day that has now been circumvented from going into the pockets of organized crime, which I find to be very, very beneficial.
How much do you think is spent a year on just from our state funds
On enforcement?
Yes.
On enforcement?
Incarceration, on and on and on.
I believe that number, if I'm recollecting, and don't hold me to it, but I think that the ACLU did have that number there, somewhere in the neighborhood of $60 to $70 million a year.
On the way walking up here, I was struck by the Thurgood Marshall Memorial outside of the Maryland House, and on that memorial it says equal justice under the law. This sticks with specifically as it relates to marijuana law enforcement because that enforcement is unequal. It is clear at this point in time that the long-term health effects of entering into the criminal justice system are significantly worse than any health effects associated with long-term marijuana use.
But in my community, we call it the black skin theory. People of color. And I think that the police community, they owe us an explanation. What I'm dealing with are generations, 10, 20 years ago, persons stopped, whether they had it or didn't have it, that's between them. They've got these records for all of their lives from a joint, from having a rose crisp. So my tension with this is that I agree, the criminal justice system, from all the statistics that I see, no matter what anyone else says, there is a racial bias that runs through it.
Baltimore County, I think you're 6.5 times as likely to be arrested for marijuana possession if you're black than if you're white. Even though there's no reason to believe that African Americans are using drugs more or more likely to be possessing them than people of other races.
People, they smoked a joint when they were 21, they got a drug conviction. Now they're 47, stayed out of trouble, trying to make a life, can't get a job, on and on and on. That is a systematic way of destroying the group. How is that able to happen?
Well, as a federal agent, I only conducted one marijuana investigation in 25 years. But I can speak on behalf of my students. Okay. I've been teaching for several years now. And a lot of my students want to become FBI agents, DEA agents. They want to go into the field of law enforcement and so forth and so on. But unfortunately, a lot of them come to me and say, well, I did commit one crime when I was 18, 19 years old. I was found in possession of small amounts of marijuana. I have a lot of horror stories that my students portray to me. Like, for example, they were asked to have their car searched, and they didn't realize the fact that they didn't have to consent to search. So many different things happen to these young people that I feel are unconstitutional, that unfortunately prohibit them